Would you give him 7 minutes on the clock, please?
No, I don't need it.
I'm giving it.
That's all right. Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. And, you know, I think a lot of people don't realize that what you said about the merits and the successes of the Clean Air Act, I've said many times, and I agree. In fact, in one of the things I was going to talk about today, that both the EIA and the EPA data indicates that since 1970, coal use has increased by over 200%, while SOx and NOx emissions have dropped by 65 and 85%, respectively. I mean, it's a success story. This is the first time that we've had Administrator Jackson here to discuss the Environmental Protection Agency's air quality regulations, so I'm very glad you are here and look forward to this hearing. I'd also like to thank the witnesses on our second panel, Kathy Willems. I'm anxious to hear how the EPA regulations are affecting the ratepayers. And Dr. Brenner, I think a reference was made to you last week by Margot Thorning, and you have a real interesting testimony, and so we can be learning more about how energy price increases and unemployment affect public health, that there is a relationship there that nobody ever talks about. So I look forward to that. You know, there's always the propensity of people who want to overregulate our lives to try to use such things as health and deaths and all of that, but we don't hear the other side of it, so we will hear some of that today. Over the past 2 years, the Obama EPA has moved forward in an unprecedented number of rules that will have enormous consequences on families and businesses and the nation's fiscal well-being. Take, for example, the EPA's new greenhouse gas cap and trade regulations. I appreciated your honesty, Administrator Jackson. Gosh, it's been months ago, I guess, when I was saying if we were to do something like that, either through regulations or through any of the legislation like the Markey and bill and some of the rest of them, would that have would that decrease concentrations? And of course, you had stated it would not have an impact on greenhouse gas concentrations. Obviously, since we are looking at where the problem is not the United States, but it's countries like China, like India, and elsewhere. I would take it one step further, and I have several times. This weren't your words, but they were mine, that it could have just the opposite effect, because as we lose our jobs, as they're out seeking power and energy, they have to go to places where the regulations are not nearly as stringent as ours. It could have an increase effect. The agency's voluntary reconsideration of the national ambient air quality standards for ground level ozone, a decision based on outdated data, could lead to significant economic constraints in the country. It is another agency action of dubious merit. The EPA projects cost of this rule to be somewhere around $90 billion, and meanwhile the agency is planning to tighten the standards again in just 2 years. The Obama EPA is aggressively moving forward to regulate nearly all aspects of American life. It is now has regulations covering dust on farms and puddles of water along the side of the road, and it is businesses and working families who have to pay for all this. Today we have a witness from the electric power industry with us, so let's focus on the regulations affecting her business for a minute. Just last week, in response to EPA's rules, the American Electric Power announced that they would be forced to close nearly 6,000 megawatts of low-cost coal-powered energy. Now, when you do the math on that, that works out to about 12 plants. As a consequence, the AEP, that's American Electric Power, estimates nearly 600 power plant workers will lose their jobs, totaling nearly $40 million in annual wages. These are good-paying jobs in rural areas in Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, and Texas. And they won't be easily replaced. Of course, the effects to the communities will be far greater than these direct job losses alone, as electricity prices increase and nearby businesses suffer in the wake of plant closures. A recent report by the National Economic Research Associations anticipates this will be replicated across the country with an estimated 48 gigawatts in plant closures. And this is just from 2 of the EPA rules. And that's the AEP tragedy eight times over. And before this analysis is criticized, let me say that it is consistent with multiple projections, including that of the Obama's Department of Energy, which estimates that plant closures could be as high as 70 gigawatts. NERA, and that's the National Economic Recovery Associates, goes on to predict that these two rules, the utility MAC and the transport rule, will cause electricity prices to increase by as much as 23%, and by 2020, 1.4 million jobs could be lost. Now, that comes from the Obama administration, not from some other association. As I said in last week's hearing, we all have an interest in dealing with real pollution concerns and protecting public health. We also know that President Obama has a cap-and-trade agenda that's specifically designed to raise the prices of energy by forcing coal and oil out of the market. That's coal, oil, and gas. He couldn't get it passed through the Senate, so now he's trying to do it with the EPA doing it for him. It's kind of interesting that everyone up here in this panel is always talking about how great all this stuff is and global warming's coming, we have to do cap and trade, and yet there probably are not, at the very most, 30 votes in the United States Senate that would support that when it comes down to a vote. So it makes for good conversation, but the votes aren't there. And it's something that no more than 1/3 of the Senate would vote for. Today, the Clean Air Act is being implemented in a way that bears no resemblance to what Congress intended. I've already said that I was a great supporter of the successes of the Clean Air Act in the past. Congress didn't give the EPA the authority to set mandates that can't be achieved. Congress didn't give the EPA authority to pursue an agenda that hurts the very people that it's supposed to be trying to protect. And we all know that Congress didn't give the EPA authority to regulate greenhouse gases. But here we are. So we hear a lot about the Clean Air Act these days, and I'll be the first to admit that industry and states have done a great job of cleaning up air over the past 40 years, but the Clean Air Act is in dire need of modernization. It needs to be updated to undo years of bureaucratic overreach and messy court rulings, updated to meet the pollution challenges of today, and yes, update to stop politicians from using it to pursue a reckless political agenda. And I have to say to our first witness, Lisa Jackson, it is nice to have you back. And I always really sincerely appreciate the fact that you do give direct answers, even when it's not popular to give them. So I thank you very much for being here. And I also heard from one of the green publications yesterday. I was doing an interview. They had gone to your office and said you still have a beautiful picture hanging on your wall. I'm just glad to hear that.
Thank you so much.